the balance of terror, from underground silos to submarine depths, from supersonic bombers to mobile launchers, every missile represented the promise of mutual annihilation. These weren't just weapons, they were instruments of deterrence that kept superpowers from open war for nearly 50 years. Each warhead carried the power to level cities. Each launch system brought humanity minutes from extinction. This is every Cold War nuclear missile. Early American ICBMs. Let's begin with the missiles that started it all. Atlas, America's first operational intercontinental ballistic missile. Deployed in 1959, this massive liquid-fueled rocket stood 10 stories tall and could deliver a thermonuclear warhead to Soviet targets in 30 minutes. It was so thin-skinned that internal pressure kept it from collapsing under its own weight. Despite being vulnerable and requiring hours of fueling, Atlas gave America its first true strategic deterrent. The Air Force retired the last missiles in 1965, but Atlas rockets still launch satellites today. Titan I, the hardened follow-up to Atlas. This two-stage monster lived in underground silos with massive hydraulic elevators that lifted it to the surface for launch. It used the same troublesome liquid oxygen and kerosene fuel as Atlas, requiring a full hour of pre-launch preparation. Crews worked in underground complexes built to withstand nearby nuclear strikes. Only 54 were ever deployed before being replaced by the superior Titan II in 1965. Titan II, the legendary liquid-fueled giant. Standing 103 feet tall, this was the largest ICBM America ever deployed. It burned storable hypergolic fuel that ignited on contact, eliminating the need for external ignition and allowing launch in under a minute. Each missile carried a single 9-megaton warhead, the most powerful ever deployed by the United States. 54 Titan IIs, stood on alert for 24 years. One explosion in Damascus, Arkansas in 1980 threw a warhead hundreds of feet, but didn't cause a nuclear detonation. The Minuteman family. The backbone of American nuclear deterrence. Minuteman I, the revolutionary solid-fuel ICBM. Deployed in 1962, this missile changed everything. Solid fuel meant no fueling delays, no cryogenic liquids, no pre-launch procedures. Just turn the key and launch within 30 seconds. 800 Minuteman ECs, Minuteman I, missiles filled silos across Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Missouri. Each carried a single warhead with a range of 6,000 miles. The Air Force retired them in 1969, but they proved the concept that would dominate for decades. Minuteman II, the improved deterrent. This upgraded version featured better guidance, longer range, and improved accuracy. 500 missiles entered service starting in 1965, each carrying a more powerful warhead than its predecessor. Minuteman II could hit targets within half a mile, exceptional precision for the era. These missiles stood ready in hardened silos designed to survive all but a direct nuclear hit. They remained on alert until the START treaties forced their retirement in the 1990s. Minuteman III, the MIRV-equipped Titan. First deployed in 1970, this missile brought multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles to American ICBMs. Each missile could strike 3 separate targets with 3 warheads, tripling America's strike capability overnight. 450 Minuteman III missiles currently remain on alert. The only land-based ICBMs in the American arsenal, they've been continuously upgraded with new guidance systems, warheads, and electronics. Some missiles flying today were built in the 1970s and are scheduled to serve until the 2030s. American experimental and advanced systems. Next on the list, the cutting-edge designs. Peacekeeper, also called MX, the ultimate American ICBM. This 10-warhead monster represented the peak of Cold War missile technology. Deployed in 1986, each Peacekeeper could devastate 10 cities with pinpoint accuracy. Standing 71 feet tall and weighing nearly 200,000 pounds, it was designed for mobile deployment, but ended up in converted Minuteman silos. Congress limited deployment to just 50 missiles, and the START II treaty forced their complete retirement by 2005. They were simply too accurate and too powerful, perfect first-strike weapons that made the Soviets nervous. Minuteman, the road mobile lightweight. This single warhead missile was designed to survive a Soviet first strike by constantly moving on armored trucks. Weighing only 37,000 pounds, small enough to be transported on public highways, it represented a shift towards survivability over striking power. Congress authorized development in 1986, but the Cold War's end killed the program in 1992 after extensive testing. Only prototypes were ever built. American submarine-launched missiles. Let's look at the sea-based deterrent, Polaris A-1, the submarine revolution. Deployed in 1960 aboard USS George Washington, this missile gave America an invulnerable second strike capability. Soviet leaders knew that, even if they destroyed every American city and military base, submarines lurking in the deep could still retaliate. Each Polaris A-1 carried a single 600-kiloton warhead with a range of 1,000 nautical miles. It wasn't particularly accurate or powerful, but it was unstoppable. Polaris A-2, the extended range model. This 1962 upgrade doubled the range to 1,500 nautical miles, allowing submarines to patrol from safer waters. The Navy deployed 130 missiles before transitioning to the superior A-3 variant. Improved solid fuel gave better performance and reliability. Polaris A-3, the MERV Pioneer. Entering service in 1964, this version carried 3 warheads and could strike targets 2,800 nautical miles away. It equipped American and British submarines throughout the 1960s and early 1970s. The Royal Navy actually kept Polaris A-3 missiles on patrol until 1996, long after America had moved on. Poseidon C-3, the Polaris replacement. First deployed in 1971, each missile could carry 10 to 14 warheads depending on the mission profile. This massive increase in striking power meant that a single Ohio-class submarine carried more destructive force than all bombs dropped in World War II. Range increased to 2,500 nautical miles with improved accuracy. Poseidon armed 31 submarines before being replaced by Trident. Trident 1C4, also called Trident 1, the intermediate upgrade. Deployed in 1979, this missile bridged the gap between Poseidon and the next generation. Each carried 8 warheads with a range of 4,500 nautical miles. Improved guidance brought circular error probable down to 1,500 feet. It equipped both older Poseidon submarines and the first Ohio-class boats. Trident II D5, also called Trident II, the ultimate submarine missile. First deployed in 1990, this remains America's primary sea-based deterrent today. Each missile can carry 8 to 14 warheads with a range exceeding 6,000 nautical miles. Accuracy is extraordinary, circular error probable of less than 500 feet, making it effective against hardened silos. 14 Ohio-class submarines each carry 24 Trident II missiles. A single submarine carries more firepower than many nuclear nations' entire arsenals. Soviet first-generation ICBMs, continuing with the Soviet strategic rocket forces. R-7 Semyorka, the missile that launched the space age. This 1957 design was the world's first true ICBM. Standing 100 feet tall with 4 strap-on boosters, it looked more like a space rocket than a weapon. That's because it essentially was modified R-7s launched Sputnik and carried Yuri Gagarin into orbit. As a weapon, it was terrible. The missile required hours of preparation, used cryogenic liquid oxygen that boiled off rapidly, and had to be launched from exposed pads. Only 6 were ever deployed operationally, but as a technology demonstrator, it shocked the world. R-16, the catastrophic disaster. This was supposed to be the Soviet Union's answer to Minuteman, using storable hypergolic fuel for quick reaction. Instead, it became infamous for the Nedeline catastrophe in 1960. During a test, the second stage ignited while hundreds of people worked around the missile. The explosion killed at least 78 people, possibly many more. Despite this horror, the Soviets deployed 186 R-16 missiles from 1963 to 1976. Desperation drove deployment. RT-2, the Soviet solid fuel pioneer. Deployed in 1968, this was the USSR's first operational solid fuel ICBM and their answer to Minuteman. Each missile carried a single warhead with a range of 6,000 miles. Only 60 were ever deployed because the design proved less reliable than liquid-fueled alternatives. The Soviets struggled with solid fuel technology for years, trailing American capabilities by nearly a decade. Soviet second-generation ICBMs, the Cold War workhorses, UR-100, NATO codename SS-11 Sago, the Soviet mass-production missile. This was the USSR's equivalent to Minuteman, a small, simple, mass-produced deterrent. First deployed in 1966, over 1,000 UR-100s filled silos across the Soviet Union by the 1970s. Each carried a single warhead initially, later upgraded to 3 MIRVs. The sheer numbers overwhelmed American missile defenses that never got built. These missiles were cheap, reliable, and good enough. Many remained on alert until the late 1990s. R-36, NATO codename SS-9 Scarp, the heavy monster. Deployed in 1967, this massive liquid-fueled missile was designed to destroy American missile silos. Weighing over 400,000 pounds and standing 120 feet tall, it carried either a single 25-megaton warhead or 3 5-megaton warheads. The Americans watched SS-9 deployments with genuine fear. These were first-strike weapons, pure and simple. 288 were deployed before being replaced by the even more terrifying SS-18. R-36M, NATO, codename SS-18 Satan, the most feared missile ever built. First deployed in 1975, this remains the largest and most powerful ICBM ever fielded. Each missile could carry 10 warheads, each 20 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb, with enough accuracy to destroy hardened command bunkers. The throw weight was so enormous that one theoretical configuration could carry 50 megatons, enough to obliterate any target on Earth. 308 SS-18s constituted the heart of Soviet strategic forces. NATO called it Satan for good reason. Modified versions still serve in the Russian arsenal today. UR-100N, NATO codename SS-19 Stiletto, the accurate striker. Deployed in 1974, this missile filled the gap between light SS-11s and heavy SS-18s. Each carried 6 MIRVed warheads with exceptional accuracy for the era. 360 missiles were deployed in hardened silos. American strategists feared SS-19 almost as much as SS-18 because the combination of accuracy and numbers could theoretically destroy America's entire Minuteman force in a first strike. Soviet mobile ICBMs, the Road Warriors, RT-21M Temp-2S, NATO, codename SS-16 Sinner, the mobile pioneer. First tested in 1972, this was the Soviet Union's first mobile ICBM. The missile traveled on a massive wheeled transporter erector launcher, hiding in forests and dispersing across the vast Soviet interior. American satellites couldn't track them all. The SALT-II, treaty banned mobile ICBMs in 1979, and the Soviets agreed to dismantle their SS-16 force. Or so they claimed. The Americans never trusted the verification. RT-2PM Topol, NATO codename SS-25 Sickle, the road mobile deterrent. Deployed in 1985, this single warhead missile traveled on mobile launchers that roamed Soviet roads and forests. Each transporter erector launcher looked like a large truck, making them nearly impossible to target. Over 360 Topols deployed before the Cold War ended. They represented a shift in Soviet strategy, away from massive multi-warhead missiles toward survivable mobile systems. Many remain operational in Russia today. RT-23 Molodets, NATO codename SS-24 Scalpel, the rail mobile giant. First deployed in 1987, this missile traveled on special trains that constantly moved across the Soviet rail network. Each train carried 3 missiles with 10 warheads each. American satellites tracked these trains obsessively, but there was no way to target them all simultaneously. Only 56 were deployed before the START treaties forced their elimination in the 1990s. The Soviets destroyed the last one in 2005. Soviet submarine-launched missiles. Let's look at the underwater threat. R-13, NATO codename SSN-4 Sark, the first Soviet sea deterrent. Deployed in 1961 aboard diesel submarines, this crude missile had to be launched from the surface after the submarine surfaced. A dangerous and vulnerable procedure. Range was only 350 nautical miles, forcing submarines close to enemy coasts. But it proved the concept and terrified Western navies. R-27, NATO codename SSN-6 Serb, the first true Soviet SLBM. Introduced in 1968, this missile could be launched while submerged, finally giving Soviet submarines a viable deterrent capability. Range increased to 1,600 nautical miles. It armed Yankee-class submarines that patrolled off American coasts, giving the USSR a credible second strike capability. Over 400 missiles were deployed. R-29, NATO codename SSN-8 Sawfly, the long-range breakthrough. Deployed in 1972, this missile shattered previous range records with a maximum reach of 5,000 nautical miles. Soviet submarines could now strike American targets while remaining in protected bastions near Soviet waters. Delta-class submarines carrying SSN-8 missiles became the backbone of Soviet sea-based deterrence. R-29R, NATO codename SSN-18 Stingray, the MIRV-equipped successor. First deployed in 1978, each missile carried 3 to 7 warheads depending on configuration. Range exceeded 4,000 nautical miles with full payload. It equipped Delta III class submarines that represented a major leap forward in Soviet underwater capabilities. R-39 Reef, NATO codename SSN-20 Sturgeon, the submarine giant. Deployed in 1983 aboard massive Typhoon-class submarines, this was the largest SLBM ever built. Each missile stood 52 feet tall and could carry 10 warheads to a range of 5,000 nautical miles. The Typhoon submarines that carried them were bigger than World War II cruisers. Only 20 R-39s were ever deployed due to the incredible cost of the Typhoon program. Intermediate-range ballistic missiles, the theater nuclear weapons, Jupiter, America's first operational intermediate-range ballistic missile. Deployed in 1961 to Italy and Turkey, these liquid-fueled missiles could strike the Soviet Union from NATO territory. Standing 60 feet tall, each carried a single 1.4 megaton warhead with a range of 1,600 miles. They were technological dinosaurs, requiring hours of fueling and vulnerable to preemptive strikes. President Kennedy secretly agreed to remove them from Turkey as part of the deal to end the Cuban Missile Crisis. All Jupiters were withdrawn by 1963. Thor, Britain's American-supplied deterrent. Deployed in 1959 across the British countryside, 60 Thor missiles aimed at Soviet targets. Like Jupiter, Thor used liquid fuel and required surface launching pads. The Royal Air Force maintained them until 1963, when Polaris submarines provided a more survivable deterrent. Thor was never a British weapon. American personnel controlled the warheads and had to authorize any launch. Pershing 1, the mobile tactical missile. Deployed in 1962 to West Germany, this solid-fuel missile traveled on tracked launchers that could relocate quickly. Each carried a single warhead with a range of 450 miles, enough to strike Warsaw Pact forces and command centers. It wasn't truly strategic, but NATO forces loved its mobility and quick reaction time. Pershing 2, the pinpoint striker. Deployed in 1983, this upgraded version terrified the Soviets. Range increased to 1,000 miles, bringing Moscow within striking distance from West Germany. But the real revolution was accuracy. Terminal guidance allowed Pershing 2 to hit within 100 feet of its target. Launch to impact took only 8 to 10 minutes, giving Soviet leaders almost no warning. The Kremlin genuinely feared these missiles could decapitate Soviet leadership in a first strike. The INF Treaty eliminated all 108 Pershing 2s by 1991. R-12 Davina, NATO codename SS-4 Sandal, the Cuban Missile Crisis weapon. First deployed in 1959, this medium-range missile could strike Western Europe from Soviet territory. Each carried a single megaton-class warhead to a range of 1,200 miles. These were the missiles Khrushchev tried to sneak into Cuba in 1962, precipitating the most dangerous crisis of the Cold War. American U-2 spy planes photographed SS-4 launch sites under construction, and President Kennedy demanded their removal. Over 500 SS-4s deployed throughout the Soviet bloc. R-14 Chusovaya, NATO codename SS-5 Skeen, the intermediate giant. Deployed in 1961, this missile extended Soviet reach to 2,500 miles, covering all of Western Europe and parts of the Middle East. Standing 80 feet tall, it used storable liquid fuel, but still required fixed launch sites. 100 SS-5s were deployed before the INF Treaty forced their elimination. RSD-10 Pioneer, NATO. Codename SS-20 Sabre, the Mobile Menace. First deployed in 1976, this revolutionary solid-fuel missile changed the European balance of power. Each carried 3 independently targetable warheads, with a range of 3,000 miles. The real threat was mobility. SS-20s traveled on tracked launchers that disappeared into forests and reappeared randomly. NATO had no effective counter until Pershing II, and ground-launched cruise missiles deployed in the 1980s. Over 440 SS-20s were deployed before the INF Treaty eliminated them all. American cruise missiles, moving on to the low-flying threats. BGM-109G Griffon, the ground-launched cruise missile. Deployed to Europe in 1983, these subsonic missiles flew at treetop level, using terrain-following radar to evade Soviet air defenses. Each carried a single warhead with a range of 1,500 miles. They launched from mobile transporter erector launchers that looked like ordinary trucks. The Soviets hated them because they were nearly impossible to track and could strike without warning. NATO deployed 464 GLCMs before the INF Treaty forced their withdrawal. BGM-109 Tomahawk, the naval cruise missile variant. First deployed in 1983, Tomahawk gave American surface ships and submarines a nuclear strike capability. Flying at high subsonic speed just above the waves, Tomahawks could approach Soviet territory virtually undetected. Each carried a single warhead with a range exceeding 1,500 miles. Surface ships carried nuclear Tomahawks in armored box launchers. Attack submarines carried them in torpedo tubes. All nuclear Tomahawks were removed from service in the early 1990s, though conventional versions still serve today. AGM-86B air-launched cruise missile. Deployed in 1982 aboard B-52 bombers, these missiles extended America's strategic reach without penetrating Soviet airspace. Each B-52 could carry 20 ALCMs externally. The missiles used terrain-following guidance to fly at low altitude, making detection difficult. Range exceeded 1,500 miles, allowing bombers to launch from outside Soviet air defense zones. Over 1,700 were built, and many remain in service carrying conventional warheads today. Soviet cruise missiles. Next on the list, the Soviet response. RK-55 Relief. NATO codename SSCX-4 Slingshot. The ground-launched copy. First deployed in 1987, this was essentially a Soviet copy of the American Tomahawk cruise missile. It traveled on mobile launchers and could strike targets up to 1,800 miles away. Only about 80 were ever deployed before the INF Treaty forced their destruction. Soviet engineers reverse-engineered the design after examining Tomahawks that crashed in the Middle East. P-700 Granite. NATO codename SSN-19 Shipwreck. The anti-carrier missile. While primarily an anti-ship weapon, Granite could be configured with a nuclear warhead for strikes against land targets or carrier battle groups. Deployed in 1983 aboard Oscar-class cruise missile submarines and Kirov-class battle cruisers, each missile was enormous, weighing 15,000 pounds with a range of 300 miles. The nuclear warhead option gave Soviet naval forces a tactical nuclear capability that NATO planners feared. From underground silos to hidden forests, from submarine depths to bomber bays, these missiles defined the Cold War's strategic balance. Each represented billions in research and development. Each required thousands of personnel maintaining constant readiness. And each carried the potential to incinerate cities in minutes. The paradox was clear. Weapons built to be used were most effective when never fired. Which one surprised you most? Let me know in the comments below.